come back into session in open session then. Item number 5, I think we have anybody signed up for public comment. Item number 6, presentation and discussion of the update report by the Director of Electric Utilities or his designee regarding customer service, business center practices, procedures and policies, billing procedures, and LP&L staffing and performance. Mr. McCullough.
In the interest of time, I'm only going to point out one thing in the business office report, and that's on page 13. Our meter reading error rate is significantly improved.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I circled that on my copy, so I was going to point that out.
Worth noting, and it's been because of a lot of hard work on behalf of our staff to really focus in on accuracy.
Meter reader error rate.
Yeah.
But on that, why did the call center handling time go up?
Yeah,
I had a bunch of peaks and valleys in that. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, I think that part of it is we had some new people in there, and the other thing was Jamie said she had emphasized to her folks to provide good customer service didn't mean necessarily that you rush through the call. You
Get them off the phone.
Try to give them the information that they need and be responsive, be courteous, and so I think that may have added a little time to it as well.
In other words, we may see a new average from that standpoint, and not necessarily having anything to do with negativity.
Yeah, I think it's positive from that perspective, is that we're trying to spend enough time with our customers to get them the information that they need.
Yeah, when we say wait time, is that because there's two deals: there average handling time and then average wait time.
Right.
So average wait time is how long they spend on hold.
Right.
And handling time is how long they spend calling. So,
And wait time has been really good the last few months. The handling time has ticked up a little bit.
other comments on that? Any questions for Mr. McCullough on the management report? Mr. Sells, are you going to go over the average monthly graph, the monthly expense graph? I didn't see that.
On the for price of electricity?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I was anticipating that. I just want to make sure.
But you can ask Mr. McCullough the question if you like.
Generally, don't go into the rate comparison even though it's in this report because it's covered in the slides.
Okay, if there's not any other questions for Mr. McCullough, then let's move on to item 7, presentation and discussion of financial and capital statements, financing options, audits, and financial policies of local power and light relating to debt issuance issues. Excuse me, reserve account funding, cost allocation, revenue and expense projections, and customer service issues of local power and light. Mr. Sayles.
Yes, sir. Thank you. All right, as always, we'll start off with the cost to our Rate 1 residential customers, which is on average 1,000 kWh. This is going through the January financials, so if you'll recall, we raised the purchase power rate as effective February 1, so that won't be reflected until next month's meeting. So we stayed flat at 102.48. Excel, we've read in several articles and press releases that they've raised rates, I believe 3 or 4 times over the last several months, and so this is the first time we see it tick up to from 101 to 106.68. And I think in the coming months, as this information lags behind, we'll continue to see their number peak up, which our green bar will also tick up next month as well, since we implemented that pass-through rate increase. Texas average falls right between us and Excel at 104.32. So over this time frame that we're looking at back to October of 13, our customers would have saved about $225 compared to Excel and $275 over the state average. Did that address your question, Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly what it was.
All right. I don't have the steadiest laser hand, but if you'll put your focus out here on the purchase power graph, we've spent lots and lots of time talking about why those bars are red and the significance of those, but you'll see in January that we had a pretty significant over collection, which is actually normal, and a lot of that is driven by residential rate 3 in the winter heat because they've got their whole house is electric heat. So we anticipated that, even though we came back to you and asking for the rate increase on the purchase power in February. And you can see in February, it ticked up a little bit, about $315,000, which was not as much as anticipated, but we also had the hottest February on record. I think the average high temperature was in the 70s, which was not hot enough to drive air conditioning load, but it was cool enough to not need the heat for those electric heat customers. So the rates are working as anticipated. The volumes just didn't come in as we had expected based on the weather. So I will go through this quickly. I know we've had a long day, and we'll continue to have a long day as everybody goes to council. But here's our income statement. You can see operating revenues are up $9.5 million compared to this time last year. It's largely driven by the purchase power pass-through. You can see we've got $8.3 million here, $9.5 here. The other component that I'll break out the revenues on the budget comparison in a few minutes, and you'll be able to see it a little more clearly. The remaining piece of that is our off-system sales and power marketing sales is up about $1 million compared to this time last year. The only other thing really worth mentioning is that depreciation is down about $900,000. That's due to the retirement of some assets, and then also, if you'll recall, during our audit presentation last month, during our FERC transition, we extended the useful life of several assets based on industry standards, and that lowered the depreciation that we see on the financial statements on a monthly basis. In terms of the balance sheet, accounts receivables down $2.7 million. That's not unusual for the time of the year. If you'll recall, we're comparing to fiscal year end in this column here. That's at the end of our summer season when our receivables are inflated the most. So we're right about where we should be in terms of our receivables. Capital assets are down $2 million compared to this time, or compared to fiscal year end, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have this massive capital program in place, and there's lots of engineering going on right now. There's not actually a whole lot of construction taking place. So I expect this to reverse course as the year progresses. That's kind of what's going on at the moment. On the other side of the balance sheet, accounts payable and due to other party, which is WTMPA, is down $3.4 million. If you'll recall, we experienced much higher our purchase power expenses, which drove our graph a few slides ago down into the red. So that was inflated at year end. Our costs are higher than we would expect for December for the pass-through, but not as high as they were at year end. So that's driving that $3.4 million change. And then the other is essentially accrued interest payable from year end, and then wages payable at year end that reversed as of 10/1 when those liabilities washed out.
Chad, I didn't bring my audit report, so just, do you recall in the OPEB number, it's 9.2 million roughly in January. What is that going to be once they implement that? Do you remember? Y'all remember what that number's going to be?
You're talking about the whole, the city's piece was 179 million. Ours is 18% of that, so I guess 36 million roughly. I mean, that's just back of the napkin math. But
the number that stuck in my head was we were going to have to add about 20 million. Is that?
And then, I mean, if we've got 9 on the balance sheet and we had 20, I mean, that gets us pretty close to the number I was approximating. I can get you a more specific number.
Well, it's in the audit report.
Yeah.
It's in our audit report. I just didn't have it with me.
Right, and mine's in my office.
Okay. It's part of the disclosure.
Sure. One thing I didn't mention on the income statement, we're up $1.1 million, almost 1.2, and change in net position, which is a $2 million improvement compared to this time last year. And you can see that number ties out here on the balance sheet. On the budget cash basis, you can see that things are tracking along as expected, with the exception of purchase power and off-system sales. Off-system sales is up significantly, 27%, compared to 3% last year, and we've discussed this every month. It's largely due to our assumptions and our modeling, and as we gain better data, we've improved that model, and so I think we have a better grasp on how to budget that data than we did the first year. So that explains the major discrepancy there. And then power plant fuel, you can see it's the same phenomenon. So if you're looking, the margins, 1.4 million in off-system sales and power marketing revenues. In power plant fuel, we've spent 1.1, so we've made about $300,000 based on those activities. And purchase power is higher than expected, but we've known that for some time. But everything else is tracking along as we would anticipate. In terms of the capital program, we've still got 69 open projects. After you take out encumbrances and expenses for bonds, we've got about 74 million in bond money left, about 13.3 in cash for a total of 87 million. Again, that's going to start be spent down pretty quickly as we get out of the engineering phase of these projects and start working on the 2 loops in our system that you're all very familiar with. And then these are the list of the top 7 capital projects that we spent the most money on during the month of January, and then the other 62 projects we spent $146,000, and so we spent $975,000 on those capital projects for the month of January. So that's all I have. I wanted to keep it short. I know you all had a long day today.
Questions for Mr. Suggs? I've got it. We talked about it earlier.
Sure.
Page 25 on the Brandon Station production budget on supply figure, we exceeded the budget by $322,000. I think we may have talked about it last month.
Sure.
That's the gas on running Brandon Station.
Absolutely, and while that, it kind of begs the question of why haven't you done a budget amendment for that particular cost center? But the way that we look at it is, and the city does the same way. We look at LP&L as a whole. Are we going to go over budget? And at the moment, we feel confident that we're not. But even within the production function, there's several $1 million still in the Massengale gas budget, and there were just things that have occurred in the market that we couldn't have anticipated in terms of, I think there was a plant in New Mexico that was down, and Brandon was needed more than anticipated. We didn't model it to run in the fall. We modeled it basically in the summer since it's a peaker unit. But going through some of the data, we've also lowered some of the run tags on our units, which for those of you that aren't familiar, Blair could speak to this at length, but my basic understanding is that if we say that it has an 8-hour run tag, if somebody calls it, it's got to run for 8 hours minimum. And as we looked through the data, there was a lot of indication that 8 hours was too long. And so I worked with Blair and Michael Weingart and shared that data. And so they lowered the run tags to make more sense of the units that we have. And then Michael has gotten better at pricing our units into the market so that, or Mr. Weingart, the production superintendent, has gotten better at pricing the units so that they're more attractive to the market. And so it's really, a need in New Mexico and SPP, and then we've gotten better at what we're trying to do in terms of marketing. And so those two things together have really driven up the need for the desire for our units, and then obviously highly correlated with that is the natural gas prices. So, does that answer your question?
Yes. Any other questions for Mr. Sales, Mr. Parker? Very good. Thank you, sir. Get back to the agenda. Okay. So now we're to the consent agenda. Let's see. I believe you, Mr. Kasner, made the statement we needed to pull item 9. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr.
Item
Chairman.
9 has been pulled. Okay. So we have item 8, which is a resolution to amend the professional services contract with Local Power and Light and Mr. Ganatra regarding professional services related to power system protection, substation control issues related thereto. Does anybody want to pull that one or discuss it further? Okay. Item 10 is consider resolution authorizing the director to execute professional services agreement and software license agreement with Hellvent USA LLC for software and professional services related to LP&L's implementation of the ARC FM software solution and data migration project. On the backup for that was in your materials. They want to pull that one and discuss it further. Okay, item 11 is consider a resolution authorizing the director to execute a non-disclosure agreement by and between the city of Lubbock, acting through LP&L and the Electric Liabilities Council of Texas related to the acquisition of confidential information from ERCOT regarding ERCOT integration studies. And there is a copy of that resolution in front of you. They need to pull that one or discuss it further. Item 12 is to execute a contract between LP&L and Wayne D. Enterprises, Inc., DBA Wayne Enterprises, for a flame retardant uniform purchase program. The detail of that is also in your materials. Item 13 is consider resolution to execute contract with the city of Lubbock, acting through LP&L and Environmental Management Utility Services LLC for the sale of used oil fields, non-PCB electrical equipment, and that's an annual pricing service, and that pertains to the transformers. And there's also a backup for that material. So unless anyone wants to pull any of those and discuss them further, I'll entertain a motion to approve the
Mr.
consent
Chairman, I'd make a motion that we approve the consent agenda as presented with the exception of item 9, which has been pulled.
Motion by Mr. Bell, second by Mr. Boatman. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Consent agenda is approved. And we'll bring this to item 14, which Mr. Boatman just made the motion, so we will be adjourned.
There's no discussion?